Welcome to the Do You Know Him podcast. My name is Lowell King. I'll be your host today. Today's podcast is entitled, Is There a God? You decide. You know, there's a lot of things that happen to people in their lifetime that I guess you could say are unexplainable. They're beyond comprehension. We can just maybe see what occurs and think, well, it's a coincidence. It's some kind of a fluke, a lucky event. There's a hundred words to try to explain something that's unexplainable. But the Bible tells us that God knows, God cares, God loves us, God just wants us to be part of His family. And He's doing things around us and in our life all the time that we just take for granted. We never give Him credit for anything, but every once in a while, something will happen that is so far beyond explanation that it's got to jog your brain a little bit and ask you to really consider, if there is a God, wow, maybe I better get to know Him. And I hope this story jogs your brain that way, because this story is, of all the things, if you don't listen to another podcast and you're listening to it right now, I'm just hoping and praying that you will listen to this entire podcast. If you don't listen to another podcast that I do, you got to listen to this one. So this story begins during a period of time that was towards the end of a financial drought that my wife and I were going through. When I say that, I think I mentioned in previous podcasts, when we became Christians, the company that I was working for, I was a sales manager for, had gone out of business. I had basically lost my employment. We wound up losing our home. We wound up losing our car. It was a pretty tough time, and we went through about 14 years where we were totally dependent on God to meet our needs basically every day. I mean, I was in commission sales, and there was never a time during that 14-year period of time when we had any kind of financial freedom. And I think that God did that because He wanted us to learn to trust Him. And we did. And we learned who He was. And we had so many experiences. And that's what this podcast is all about, is sharing some of the things that God did in our life so that other people maybe will be encouraged to give Him a chance to show what He can do in your life. Well, this particular time was one of the low spots in our life. And when I say that, I mean low. We had moved from a home that we were renting for about, I think 12 years or so, somewhere around there, maybe 10. And the people that were renting us the house, the gentleman who owned it, passed away, and one of the family members wanted to move into the house. So they asked us to move, and we had a friend who had a house that wasn't very far from this one, and they were going to be moving out of this area, so they wanted us to go there and rent the house. So, the problem is my income was so inconsistent, it made it really, really difficult to find a place to live, and we were very grateful that they had opened their home for us to live in. So we moved in, and for a while there, it was, okay. We would maybe get behind a month, and then we would catch up, and it went on and on like this. But at some point in time, it really got to be bad, and we were like 3 months behind on our rent, and I was feeling really bad. I was thinking maybe we should just move. I didn't know where we would move to. We didn't have any money. We had no ability to pay them, but at the same time, I didn't want to impose on them. So there was a lot of things going on in our life. And so one day I got a call from the owner, and I'm not going to mention any names here. I just wanted to share what actually occurred. And he said, this and that. And then he says, well, we need you to move out. So I thought, well, where are we going to move? So this was like the second or third day of the month, and so I'm thinking that I just have no idea where we're going to move to because we have no money, we have no way to rent another house. I wouldn't even begin to think of where we might be able to move to. And so I'm sitting there and I'm kind of like stumbling over the words, and I'm thinking, I need to buy some time some way. I just had something in my mind, so I just arbitrarily pulled a date out of the air. Now I know it wasn't pulled out of the air. By the way, it was God speaking to me and giving me a date. But at the time, I had no idea. And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, Bill." Oh, Bill. Yeah, that was his name. So a lot of Bills in the world. I said, if we haven't been able to pay the rent in full, and that's 3 months, by the way, uh, then we'll be out on the first. And he said, okay, fine. So here we are, like 18 days away from having to either pay him completely, bring it up to date, which is 3 months of rent, was a lot of money, or we have to move out. So, and I have no plan other than that. I told him the 20th, I have no money. I have no business from my commission sales. I was in the mortgage business at that time, and I had no idea about how I would ever come up with that kind of money. In fact, as far as I was concerned, I told my wife, I said, you know what we need to do? We need to start packing because we will be moving. It's as simple as that. We're not going to have any choice. There's no way we could possibly come up with that much money. And I didn't want to borrow money because even if I borrowed the money from somebody, how would I repay them? The business was so bad at that time. This was a time, by the way, I think Jimmy Carter was president at that time, and the interest rates for the prime rate, just to give you an idea, which is now, 1 or 2% or whatever it is, at that time was 18%. And people were paying 12% for a mortgage on their home. So the real estate market was in the doldrums, and that was what I was doing, was real estate loans. So I told her, I said, we think we need to start packing because we're going to be moving and so on and so forth. So the situation for us was so bad. I had been working for a mortgage company across the bay, excellent mortgage company, by the way, private investment company where private people would put up money and they would make loans to people for commercial and for residential property. But that business had gotten so bad that the company was so afraid that the property values were going to keep going down. So they would pull their horns in, so to speak, and they weren't making many loans. So I left my real estate license there, but I went to work for Great Western Bank. And I was on pretty much just a draw for the first 90 days. So I wasn't making very much money. I was just getting a small amount of money each week, which was paying basically things like PG&E and food and gas and whatever, but no financial freedom. So I received a call from somebody who was referred to me. I think it was like the fourth or maybe even the third. It was very close to the date that I talked with Bill, and he was a fellow from Russia, and he had purchased a property in the Oakland Hills, and it was basically completely rehabbing the property from the ground up. And it was going to be a property that was going to be worth, and this is many years ago, it was going to be worth about $1.5 to $2 million. Today, it'd probably be worth 10. But he needed to borrow a fairly large amount of money. And so he wondered if we might be interested in the project. Well, I didn't have gas enough in the car to go and meet with him or anything else. So I just kind of like figured this is probably not a kind of deal. The house is half built. It's probably not going to be a loan that we're going to want to make anyway for the company. But I told him what the basics that I would need to get the transaction at least considered. So he called me the next day and he said, "Did I have all the paperwork? Is there any way we can meet?" And I said, "Well," I said, I was kind of stalling again because I didn't even have bridge toll money to go across the bridge to Redwood City where my office was. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to be in my office for a couple of days." I said, "Any chance you'll be in the Redwood City area?" And he says, "Oh, I'm going to be there tomorrow." So I said, "Well, go ahead and drop the package by there for me, and then I'll arrange to pick it up, and we'll go from there." And I kind of never even thought he would even bring the package by, to be honest with you. But he did. And it just so happened in the building where our office was, our sales office was downstairs, and it was a good probably 150 feet, no, maybe 100 feet from the corporate office. The upstairs office was where all the corporate people were, but our sales office was downstairs on another section of the building. And rarely would the owner of our company actually come down to the sales office. I mean, he might come down, once or twice a week, but it would be a rarity when he would come down. And if we needed to talk with him, we would go up to his office. He wouldn't come down to our office. So a unique thing happened that day. My client got there and parked in the parking lot and was walking towards the sales office to drop off the package. And my boss, who never comes down the stairway from upstairs, happened to be, almost met him at the door. And when he met him at the door, he said, "Hi, can I help you?" And my client said, "Well, this package is for Lowell King. And, we've got a project we're doing over in the Oakland Hills, and we're seeing whether or not you guys might be interested in it." And Mike Burwell, the owner of the company at that time, did something rather unique because he's a busy guy. And he said, "Well, tell me about the project." And so the two of them had this conversation. He showed him the paperwork that he had brought over. And he said, "Well, we're going to be doing a loan committee meeting, which is usually just once a week, but they happen to be having a loan committee meeting that day." And he said, "I'll present it to our group upstairs and see what their thoughts are." So my client leaves, and Mike takes the package and goes upstairs. They have their loan committee meeting. And when they got done looking at the package, he said, "Well, we'd like to do something with this." So he called me, and he said, "Lowell, hey, your client came by, dropped off the package. We're seriously looking at this thing. It might be a transaction that might work for us." I said, "Well, that's great." And then he said, "I'm going to send you over tomorrow. I'll send you a list of the things that we need in order to put this together." So I said, "Great." So I didn't want to go over and get it. Again, got a bridge toll and gas driving over there from where I was at. So I said, "Well, is there any way you could just fax it to me at this Post Office Express or whatever it was?" Which he did. And I went over and picked it up, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And I looked at it, and there were like 23 items that they wanted. Documentation was just amazingly, it was a good company, but they always did things by the book. So I was almost reluctant to call the guy, but I did. I called him and I said, "Look," I said, "they're interested in the project, but they've asked for quite a bit of paperwork." And he said, "Well, send it over to me, send a list over, and I'll see what I can do about putting it all together." So I said, "Okay, fine." So I faxed that over to him at that point, and pretty much thought, well, 23 items, even if he could come up with some of it, I doubt that he's ever going to be able to document this the way that the company requires. And again, I'm kind of like not even giving this any kind of serious consideration. So he called me the next morning. Well, now we're getting to be, I think it was about the 8th or 9th of the month. And I'm thinking, well, he says, I've got the paperwork together for you, most of it. He said, I'm missing one or two items, but he said, I think I've got enough that they can probably take a look at it. So I said, well, okay, fine. Go ahead and let's see if we can connect. And he says, well, I'm going to be in Redwood City tomorrow again. Do you want me to drop this by your office? And I said, yeah, that would be great. So naturally, the next day, which would have made it around the 10th or maybe the 11th, he dropped the paperwork downstairs in the sales office, and I got a call from the secretary down there that somebody had dropped off a package for me, so I knew it was down there. So I called Mike Burwell, the owner of the company, and I told Mike that he had dropped the package off, and I said, I'm not going to be over there for a couple of days again. And I said, I just want to let you know the paperwork was down there. And he said, well, I'll go down and take a look at it. So literally either that afternoon or the first thing the next day, he called me and he says, Lowell, he says, this fella has provided us with all but two items, but the items he doesn't have yet are really minor items. And he says, we're not going to worry about that because we know we can get them and bring them into us. So we've decided to go ahead with this loan. And I said, oh, that's great. I said, wow. And I'm thinking in my mind, wait a minute. Today's like the 11th or 12th. Is there any way possible this could close, that quickly that we could actually get a payday? But I'm thinking that's probably out of the question. But I did ask him, I said, do you have any idea when this might close? And he kind of laughed and he says, well, this is a lot of money. I think it was around $750,000, or it was a lot of money. That's all I can remember. I don't remember the exact amount of the loan, but it was larger than most of the loans that I had been able to put together. And he said, this is a lot of money. And he said, quite honestly, it could take us a while to fund it. And he said, we have to get the investors excited about the idea of doing this, and then it's all the paperwork we have to do, so on and so forth. So I said, okay. I said, well, I appreciate it, and thank you very much for everything you've done so far. So he called me not even 2 days later. So now we're probably looking at the 14th or 15th of the month. And he said, Lowell, you're not going to believe what happened this morning. He said, we had done a loan on a property, a commercial building for I think it was $2 million. And we just got a payoff check for the $2 million. And he said, we have the money to put everything together to do this deal in Berkeley. And I'm like, ecstatic. I could not believe that what was going on here before my eyes. Now, there's a little part of the story that I haven't shared with you yet, but this is a very important part, so I want to explain it to you. Typically, with companies like this, they have what's called a wholesale rate, and the wholesale rate is a rate that they tell the salesman, this is the amount that the company has to receive, and you are able to add your fees on top of that as a salesperson. So naturally, you're trying to be competitive. So you're trying to, all the banks do this as well, by the way. And so the salespeople usually are going to charge a certain amount over and above whatever the amount that the company is saying. At this point, number one, I don't even know how much the loan is going to be for, the dollar amount. I don't know the term of the loan, so I don't know how long it's going to be. And I certainly know nothing about any kind of loan fees that have been quoted to the buyer or the borrower at this point. So I'm totally in the dark. To make it all the more complicated, I'm not even an employee of the company technically anymore. My real estate license is there, but I'm working for the bank. And so I'm not really over there like I was doing before when I was full-time an agent for them. So I have no idea what Mike has negotiated with this gentleman. I have no idea what kind of a fee he's included in his quote to this person, which will be my commission. And so I'm in the dark completely. I have no idea how much this loan's going to be or how much I might potentially make. I wouldn't even know if there would be enough money there for us to catch up on the rent. But it wasn't just the rent. We had other payments that were behind, quite a few, I might add. So a couple days go by, and I get another call from Mike, and he says, "Okay, fine. We've got approval from the actual investors who are going to make the loan. We're drawing documents, and we're projected to try to close this as soon as possible." So I said, "Well, could you give me an idea of what day you might be able to close the deal?" So he looks at the paperwork, comes back on the phone, and he says, "Well, right now, if everything goes the way we want it to go, it's scheduled to close on the 20th." The 20th. Did you hear me? The 20th. The same day that I told the owner of the home that we're renting that we would pay him. I was flabbergasted. I didn't even know what to say. I was in tears. And I came and told Cecilia, "It looks like we're going to get some kind of a paycheck. I have no idea whether it's going to be enough, but at least we're going to have a paycheck. Even if we can't stay here, at least we'll have some money that we'll maybe be able to go and rent a place somewhere else. At least, just a little bit of financial freedom, a little bit of a light cracking through the darkness, if that makes any sense." So I thought, okay, fine. So as the days progressed, the paperworks were all signed. Yes, in fact, we did close on the 20th. And I remember that morning, I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning. My check was not going to be ready until about noon. And I sat with a stack of bills that had to be paid, starting with 3 months of rent. And I was projecting out what we would have to need for basics like PG&E and the water bill and the garbage bill and the groceries that we needed for the next 2 months. I did everything based on a 2-month projection, and I was just trying to make sure that anything that we were behind on, we got caught up, and that there would be enough of whatever we needed to have everything current and at the same time have some money set aside, because I had no idea the next time I was going to get a paycheck. So I remember as I totaled it out and I wrote this number down, which I don't remember the amount, to be honest with you, it was substantial. And I thought, there's no way. There's no way that could possibly be this much money. But the part that was really hard was the fact that I had no idea what Mike had already calculated in and told the guy. I mean, it wouldn't really matter at this point because all the paperwork was already signed. The fact of the matter is, whatever we were going to receive was going to have to be adequate. That's the best way I could put it. So I remember that day after I made the list, Cecilia and I got ready, and we decided we hadn't done anything that was really extravagant, and we certainly didn't do anything that extravagant that day. But one thing that we really did enjoy doing on occasion, maybe once every 3 months or so, we used to go to Sweet Tomatoes or Fresh Choice, if you know that kind of a style restaurant where, salad and soup and whatever. And so that day we decided that we were going to just go ahead and splurge, I guess you call it, and go to Sweet Tomatoes. So we went early enough that we went at early lunch, and then we made our way over to the company office, and sure enough, they had my check ready for me. It was in a sealed envelope, and I was wearing a 3-piece suit at that time, by the way, with a tie. I even got dressed up to go over and get the check. And so I remember putting the check in my coat, and we got in the car, and we were driving back to where we were living in Newark. And Redwood City was on the west side of the bay, and we had to cross the Dunbarton Bridge, which is kind of like between San Jose and Hayward or Oakland. There's the San Mateo Bridge, and then there's also the Dunbarton. We were on the Dunbarton, which is the bridge is further south from the San Mateo Bridge. And we were going across the bridge, and Cecilia, my wife, said, is it enough? And I said, I have no idea. I haven't looked at it yet. I was afraid to look at it, to be honest with you. I didn't even want to think about looking at the check. And she said, well, give it to me. I'll look at it, which is, she did. She opened the envelope, and then she held the check in front of my eyes. And I'm trying to drive. At the same time, I didn't have my reading glasses on, so I couldn't read the numbers or anything. And I said, you know what? It really doesn't matter how much the check is. It's going to have to be enough for us to be able to either stay or leave or whatever it is we have to do. I'm just grateful that we have some kind of a paycheck. And so I put the check back in my coat, and I remember as we got back to the house, I went into the bedroom where my office was, and I had the stack of bills, and then I had this sheet of paper that I had taken all of these numbers for the projections as well as the rent and so on and so forth. And I remember taking the check out, and I laid the check next to the sheet of paper with all the numbers on it. And I started laughing and crying simultaneously. And Cecilia heard me, and she came in and she says, are you okay? I was speechless. I couldn't even talk. And I finally got it together, and I said, you know what? God not only delivered us, but he has a sense of humor. And I said, I know he knows everything about us. I know he knows what we're going through. The Bible tells us that he even knows the hairs on our head, the number of hairs on our head. And I'm thinking, he knows us intimately. And I laughed and I said, either he's got a good sense of humor or he's a bad mathematician, because he's off $3. She says, really? And I said, yeah. Can you imagine that? I said, we have $3 more than we need based on what I'm showing here and what I had prepared this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I called the landlord and told them that we were going to go to the bank and that we were not going to send them a personal check. We were going to send them a cashier's check, because I didn't want them to worry about it. I didn't want them to think, well, is the check going to clear or whatever, because things hadn't been very good for us. And so that's exactly what we did. We drove over to the bank at that time. It was Commercial Bank of Fremont, which was the bank that I banked with. And I went in and cashed the check, or actually put the check in our checking account. And then I got the cashier's check, and my intention was to get in the car and just drive over to the post office. I wanted to go out in that day's mail, which is exactly what we wound up doing, by the way. And so after I got the cashier's check, I thanked the lady that was helping us, and we turned around and started to walk out of the bank, and I hear, Mr. King, Mr. King. And I said, yeah. And she said, can you come here for a minute? And I said, sure. And she said, I know I shouldn't have to do this, but she said, we charge $3 for the cashier check. And I laughed, and I started crying too, again. Now I understand why I have a $3 abundance over and above the amount that was on the end of on that sheet that I had calculated. I want you to try to understand this, because I pulled those numbers out of the sky in terms of trying to be reasonable about the exact amount I was going to need for each one of the items that were on that list. And there was about 15 items on the list, including the 3 months of rent. They were projections on what it was going to cost for the next 2 months. for things like groceries and even things like dry cleaning and things. I mean, I didn't miss hardly anything. And here we are with a number on the bottom of a sheet, which is exactly the amount plus $3. And now the bank is telling me that I need to pay them $3 for this cashier's check. So what I'm trying to say here is that this was the exact, to the penny, amount of money that we needed. I hadn't discussed this with anyone. I hadn't even talked to Cecilia about it. She had no idea how much money was involved. She didn't even see the sheet that I had done all the calculations on. There's only one explanation for something like that, and that is the fact that God delivered our needs. It's as simple as that. There's no way possible that it could be explained to the penny other than his intervention. And not only that, it's not only the dollar amount, it was the idea that this person called me to begin with, that somewhere or another he and I made a connection, and that he was able to put together all the paperwork that my boss needed at that time, that the timing on it was such that we would close on the 20th, the very date that I told the homeowner who we were renting from that I would send the check. It just goes on and on and on. The idea that this just happened by coincidence is absolutely, I mean, I don't even know what the odds would be. They would be so astronomical that it would be beyond anything science would even suggest that they would believe. Well, anyway, that's my story. And, you know, you can believe it or not. It's a true story. And it's a story that I love to tell people because God knows. God cares. God loves us. God wants to show us that he's alive, that he's well, and that he wants us to be, and as I said in an earlier podcast, a part of his family. He knows what we're going through, and he cares. He wants us to know he's like a father a million times better than an earthly father. He's a father with unlimited resources, unlimited ability to orchestrate something like this to occur in our life, to build our faith. He's amazing. He's how do you even explain this kind of love, this kind of concern, this kind of caring for one of his children? Well, I always ask this question, do you know him, at the end of the podcast? This really requires me to say something a little bit more than just that. I just really want you to, as you hear this story, if you take the time to listen to it, to understand who he is and what it could be like if you had a relationship with him. So I always ask that question. The most important question that anyone will ever ask you is, do you know him? And the reason is because if you know him, then you'll experience him, that you'll find that you can be a member of his family, and that he wants not only to be with us throughout whatever we're going through here on this earth, but he wants us to be with him in heaven as well, when this time on this earth is gone. So I'm not going to ask that question today, but I'm going to suggest that you consider reaching out. Jesus said, if you knock, the door will be open. He said that he's the only way to the Father. And if you really want to consider that as serious, because it really is serious, then give him a chance. Reach out and just ask God, say, Lord, if you're really real, would you please reveal yourself? I don't want to just know about you. I want to know you. I want to have that kind of relationship that Lowell King is talking about. Well, God bless you. You have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed this real life, true story about God's involvement in my life.